Hello my wonderful nerds, it's time once again to delve into the science side of world building. And do I have a treat for you this week? To celebrate the release of my new book, Sacaran Nights, I'm going to be delving into the wonderful ways that fungi can be used in world building. Now, fungi are an overlooked feature of fantasy settings, in my humble opinion. But fungi are really cool. I've thought this since I was 16 and I did a summer placement where I was studying Neurospora crassa, more commonly known as bread mold, and cut to a few years later and I studied them again at university under the tutelage of one of the most insane professors I think who has ever existed, but his enthusiasm must have been contagious because something stuck, because here I am several years later still going on about how awesome fungi are, sharing the fungi love. Wait, that sounds like a new type of STI. So, how can fungi be incorporated more into fantasy? Or in the creation of fungal fantasies, if you will? Oh, so many ways. Prepare yourselves for your minds to be blown. I have had loads of fun with this while writing Sacaran Nights, and I think you will have lots of fun with using fungi as well. There are just so many different ways that we can use fungi in our fantasy stories. So much so that I actually ended up producing a whole catalogue of different species for use in the book. In fact, harkening back to a video from a few weeks ago, I actually included a mycologist character in my story who was going around sketching all of the different fungal species there, observing how they behaved, and I used these at the start of each of the chapters, introducing a different fungi, giving a bit of the nomenclature and a bit of the properties of the species. But having a character who is interested in studying fungi is one fantastic way of incorporating fungi in your story, but it isn't the only way. So let's go through some of the more basic uses of fungi in fantasy to begin with. We'll get on to the more exciting ones in a minute. So the first probably won't blow your mind, but I like to cover all of my bases. First up, food. Obviously, we need to include this one. Want to flavour both your world and that meal that you're preparing for one of your characters? Okay, that was a bad fungi joke, but they are a great way to make your setting more unique. And doing it through food is an easy way to do this. So come up with an appearance for your fungi, figure out how it can be foraged for, and figure out if there are any special requirements when it comes to preparing it so that it is in fact edible. We're not going to kill your characters. Which brings me on to useful use of fungi number 2, poisons. Many fungi aren't edible. They might even kill you if ingested or breathed in, like certain types of mold. Some will kill you fast, some will kill you very slowly. So the list of possible ways that fungi are dangerous is huge. And the cool thing is that as a world builder, you don't even have to limit yourself to all the ways that fungi in our world can kill people. I've developed all sorts of absolute disgusting diseases for Sacaran Nights that greatly added to the dangerous atmosphere that I created in that setting. I have fungi that causes gastric upset. I have others that attack the brain and leave you comatose. I even have fungi that make you infertile. There is plenty of creative fun to be had with them. And a great way to do this is just to think about different mechanisms for how the fungi might be dangerous, how it might cause death. Does it have to be breathed in or eaten? How does it unleash its poisons? Through puffing spores into the air or by leaking out a toxic solution that is poisonous when ingested? All of this potential death leads me on to common use for fungi number 3, healing. You have the obvious ones like antibiotics, penicillin and others like it that we have in our world. This is actually a really interesting area of research in our world that we're looking at right now. We're looking at how fungi can help boost our immune systems or reduce cholesterol levels and all sorts of very exciting areas. But you don't have to just stick with what we have in our world. As with the more deadly types of fungi, you can make up creative new ways that fungi could help heal. Perhaps you have a fungi that can get compacted into wounds to help keep them healthy, can keep infections away. The last of the common ways people use fungi in their stories is yeast. So go get creative with all sorts of brews that you're brewing in your cultures. Again, another bad joke. These can help add another great flavour to the world. I have an expensive alcohol called Night's Nectar in Sacaran Nights and a cheaper one called Gut Rot, which people in different parts of the city brew because they have access to different types of fungi. And I got to work in all sorts of aspects of world building that were really cool that went into the creation of these. And now we move on to the lesser used properties of fungi and how you can incorporate them. And don't feel like you're limited to the ones that I am going to say here. There are plenty of others. This is a space where you can get very creative in what you make possible. I'm just compiling this list here to inspire you, but if you want to explore something new, then I applaud you for it. Go crazy and let me know what you do. So, first up, and my favourite aspect of world building, funeral rites. They are my first point of call for all of the worlds I create. I guess that could be why I end up with so many characters dying in my stories, but anyway, in Sacaran, they have an issue with decay. They're very opposed to it. They consider it a sign of weakness in the society and a degradation to the dead, so efforts are made to remove the flesh from the bone after death so it stops it from decaying. They do this by placing the body into a tomb of water and placing a single white floret of a fungi known as the flowers of mourning onto the water. This fungi then activates and secretes a strong acid into the water. The acid disintegrates the flesh and the fungi feasts on the nutrients released by this process. And it uses these nutrients to grow and divide and multiply until eventually there are lots and lots of these white florets that just cover the tomb and cascade over the edges in this beautiful white waterfall. It's really cool, no? Really interestingly in Sacaran, there are these two cultures, Upper and Lower Sacaran. Each has its own nomenclature when it comes to the fungi that they see around there, and only Upper Sacarans call this one the flowers of mourning. Instead, in Lower Sacaran, they call it flesh rot. They are far more literal in what they term the fungi. So that was an interesting way that I created complexity in the world that I've created, helping make Sacaran feel even more real and unique. Another way that you can use a property of a fungi in your world to do this is by thinking about how fungi could be used for light. There are some fungi that are bioluminescent. They glow. And this can be visually a very cool addition to your world. I used it in Sacaran Nights by creating a species that grows on these wooden beams that hang in the middle of the street. And it's a really good light source because the city is in constant darkness. It's caught underneath this ash cloud, is the whole thing. And it makes this weird eerie blue glow that covers everything and just makes the streets really beautiful and yet sinister at the same time. They have to do this because they can't burn wood because it's really expensive to import it because there's no light. The trees can't grow there. So one wooden beam sustains a lot of fallen stars for a really long time and so is a much more effective use of the wood that they import into their city. Next up is the general function of decay and decomposition. There is a lot of fun ways that we can use this. I created what the Upper Sacarans called the putrefaction fields, the Lower Sacarans call it the rot fields, which is where servants routinely dump all their household waste. They don't have sewage systems in Sacaran, so I mean all of their waste. And this creates this huge smell. It's this field of just rotting everything. There's a lot that you can do with this kind of thing. Do you have an environment rich in fungi that means that crop growth is really difficult? Or perhaps you have a magical forest that's littered with fungal species that are feasting on the dead foliage and detritus that's just littering the forest floor. Now for some quickfire uses of fungi. Pesticides. Mind control. Yes, it happens and it's gross and yet really fascinating too. Then you have my absolute favourite feature of the fungal world, the way that they can help plants communicate, obviously. Colloquially, it's known as the World Wide Web of fungi. I called it the Nexus in my story because that's just cool. And this, in our world, exists in the soil beneath our feet. And plants use this to share insights and advice with other plants. It's so freaking cool. I got to use it in Las Memoria by giving my character the ability to access and edit the memories of plants through this network. Yes, I know plants don't have memories. We covered this. The people with this ability could access the network and find plants that had fruit-bearing properties or other things that they needed, and so they could navigate the forest with it. So there you have it. You can use fungi to help your plants and people communicate and do so much more. And the really cool thing is that there are more species of fungi being discovered every year. That means there are who knows how many other types of fungal properties that you could use in your story for inspiration. I hope this has inspired you to get creating some fungal fantasies of your own. I've only touched on a small number of the species I created in Sacaran Nights, so if you want to see how extensive I went with the world building for that book, and I mean extensive, then check out the links below and don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't want to do a hard sell, but if you did order the book, that would mean the world to me. I think it's a fantastic example of how you can explore themes of loss, decay, death, regret in fantasy. But there you go, spin over. Goodbye, my nerds. See you next week. Bye.